What is happening in this picture? Four women dancing together in a large hall. Who are they? Where are they? Who is this spectral onlooker? This picture of an all-female party dancing in a medieval timbered hall was created by a British artist called Ursula Wood and dates from the First World War. It was made in 1918. It is now in the collection of the Imperial War Museum, with a number of other works from the First World War by the same artist. Ursula Wood was born in Islington, North London, in 1868. She trained at St John's Wood Art School and the Royal Academy Schools. At the Royal Academy, she won the Turner Gold Medal for 1889 with a landscape on the theme Morning. A reviewer in The Scotsman of 12th December 1889 described her painting, which showed a farmyard at dawn, as the least pretentious of the works entered for the competition, and compared it favourably with the resplendent roseate paintings produced by her competitors. This was the first time the Turner Medal, instituted in 1857, had been won by a woman. Wood established a successful career, painting in oils and watercolour and exhibiting widely. She was a versatile artist, particularly noted for her landscapes and her pictures of children, but she also painted interiors and genre pieces. She was a member of the Society of Women Artists and a regular participant in their exhibitions, as well as frequently exhibiting at the Royal Academy, the Royal Scottish Academy, and the Royal Glasgow Institute, and a number of private galleries. She had family connections with Shetland, and painted and exhibited there on several occasions. Some of her Shetland views are now at the Shetland Museum in Lerwick. Wood also painted a number of religious works, including, in 1917, 2 panels for St Paul's Church, Southsea, sadly destroyed when the church was bombed during the Second World War. She was also an illustrator and was active in arts and crafts circles. Her life partner was another artist, Emily Sarah Stewart Wood, known as Emmy. The two ran a studio together, travelled together, painted together, and exhibited together. Her sister, Catherine Mary Wood, was also an artist who specialised in flower pieces and still life. In 1917, Ursula Wood joined the Women's Forestry Corps. This organisation had been set up at the beginning of that year as a section of the Women's Land Army, although it later came under the direction of the Board of Trade, the government department responsible for the timber industry. When war broke out in 1914, Britain was almost entirely dependent on imported timber, with over 90% of British timber requirements being fulfilled by wood shipped from Scandinavia, Russia, and Canada. Timber was essential for a huge range of uses: construction work, buildings, shipbuilding, pit props, railway sleepers, fuel, pulp for paper production, to name but a few, and the quantities required were vast. British coal mines alone required 100,000 tons of timber every month. The outbreak of hostilities severely restricted the importing of timber, forcing Britain to turn to its domestic timber industry, which was limited in scale and had lost many of its workers to military service. The Women's Forestry Corps, sometimes called the Forestry Service or the Timber Corps, although, strictly speaking, that was the name of its Second World War successor, was intended to replace the male timber workers who had joined the forces, and to help the timber industry expand production and become more efficient. Although they have been largely forgotten by history, the Corps' members, generally known as timber girls, did all that was asked of them, and succeeded in these aims. The newspaper of the Women's Land Army, the Landswoman, summarised the need for women to work in the timber industry in the following terms. Our sailors need wood for their ships. Our soldiers need wood for their railways, their shelters, and their aeroplanes. in order to provide timber for the Navy and the Army, women must help in the work. The Women's Forestry Corps ran a training camp at Wendover, Buckinghamshire. Women were trained there to assess the quality and cubic capacity of standing timber, and to measure both standing and felled timber, and to work as timber cutters. The Illustrated War News reported in January 1918 that wood women were engaged in the healthy work of felling light timber in the forests, but many more than the 500 or 600 already engaged in it are needed, and cited the health value of open-air work in beautiful surroundings, the good pay, and the provision of a becoming outfit, including overalls, breeches, top boots, and hat, as among the attractions of the Corps. In August 1918, a contributor to the Landswoman noted that, once upon a time, if one had wanted to paint a picture of forestry, there could have been no figures in it but weather-beaten men. But now, here come the girls, flocking out from their huts, looking for all the world like a convoy of angels in their white smocks. The membership of the Forestry Corps grew to around 2,000, as compared with the Women's Land Army strength of about 280,000, but this relatively small unit had a considerable impact on wartime timber production. They worked alongside the Canadian Forestry Corps, Portuguese foresters, and with German prisoners of war to assess, clear, and process over 180,000 hectares of timber between the beginning of 1917 and the end of the war, contributing to an increase in domestic timber production from under 1 million tons in 1913 to over 4.5 million tons in 1918. Ursula Wood was a working member of the Forestry Corps and not an official war artist, but she recorded the work of the Corps in a number of pictures, some of which were purchased after the war by the Women's Work Committee of the Imperial War Museum. The historian Catherine Speck discusses the acquisition of Wood's work by the IWM in her 2014 book, Beyond the Battlefield, Women Artists of the Two World Wars, as an example of the way women's war art and war art dealing with women's experiences were dismissed and undervalued. The Women's Work Committee were keen that these pictures, which they called first-hand historical records very carefully done of work which will probably never be seen again, should be bought for the IWM, but the Art Committee of the museum, which consisted entirely of men, disagreed, calling them not particularly interesting. Eventually, 5 of Ursula Wood's works were purchased, but at a lower price than she had requested. The small size of the Women's Forestry Corps, the way in which its operations were organized, with women deployed in small units to sometimes isolated rural areas, and the shared nature of the hard work the women carried out, contributed to a distinctive sense of camaraderie, and Wood's pictures convey that atmosphere. All the pictures have her characteristic robust and vigorous modelling of figures, economy of line, and carefully managed, highly effective use of a limited colour palette. This view shows activities at the Forestry Corps' main depot and training centre at Wendover in Buckinghamshire. Prominent here are the heavy tackles used to move the timber from place to place and to hold it firmly while it is being worked upon. The men in blue trousers and distinctive caps are German prisoners of war. German prisoners were used as a source of labour in war timber production, both in Britain and in France. In the background, Canadian Forestry Battalion soldiers in broad-brimmed hats are stacking cut timber using a set of shear legs. In the centre of the image is a group of Forestry Corps women in their distinctive green berets, measuring and marking timber for cutting. They vary in posture, and each is carrying out a slightly different activity, but their poses are complementary, and they are united by the care and concentration with which they are carrying out their work, creating a unified and focused group that contrasts with the surrounding male figures. Their tight, rhythmic grouping in the centre of the image, their figures united by their distinctive clothing and eye-catching green berets, holds the scene together visually, but also has a deeper significance, expressing the centrality of their role to the complex and demanding process of timber production, and emphasizing the calm mastery with which they exercise their skills and responsibilities. The second of these pictures is also from the timber camp at Wendover. Here there is more emphasis on the timber itself. Huge logs, still partly clad in bark, dominate the scene, their highly textured and contoured surfaces creating a landscape within the landscape, over which human figures clamber. The most prominent figures are two Forestry Corps women, who are, as the title of the work has it, measuring, girthing, and marking timber. That is, measuring the girth of the sawn trunk as a way of calculating, given its length, the volume of timber it contains, and marking it with that figure and with an indication of how it should be cut. Wood for different purposes had to be cut to different lengths, and with an identifier. These details are then recorded in a notebook. These were among the central skills taught by the Forestry Corps at Wendover. 4 women here are learning how to measure, record, and mark a log, each taking on a particular part of the process. Measuring was skilled work, and this was reflected in higher pay. Other work was paid at 20 shillings per week, or the prevailing local rate, if that was higher, but measurers were paid a set rate of 45 shillings per week. In the background of Ursula Wood's picture are other activities typical of the Wendover camp. A group of German prisoners of war are sawing the trunks of felled trees into logs, which will then be measured and marked. Visible behind the figure of the woman taking notes is a roofed structure with the chimney of a steam engine projecting above it. This is a steam sawmill operated by the Canadian Forestry Corps. Such machinery was generally not available in the more remote locations where the women foresters worked, so they did all the necessary sawing themselves, by hand. This picture shows more of the wider environment than the previous one, and gives some indication of the devastation wartime timber production wreaked on the landscape. The hillside in the background is strewn with fallen and stripped trunks, with so far untouched trees clinging precariously on to the edge of the slope behind. By the end of the First World War, nearly half Britain's productive forests had been cleared, and woodland coverage in Britain had fallen to 5%, the lowest figure since records began. Following the First World War, measures were taken to increase woodland coverage and to ensure that in any future conflict Britain would have the domestic wood stocks it required. The Women's Forestry Corps itself had been involved in planting trees as well as cutting them down during the war. The organization continued in existence until the end of 1919, and many of its members hoped for the chance to use their hard-won skills and experience to find continuing work in forestry in peacetime. But, as with other sectors of the economy, the women who had answered their country's call and worked so well during the war found themselves demobilized, dismissed, and forgotten in the post-war years, as the men returned and wanted their jobs back. The third picture is the one we began with, which shows the Forestry Corps not at work, but at play. The scene is the hall of the old palace at Hatfield, Hertfordshire, a remaining portion of a medieval building which is part of the Hatfield House estate. These women of the Forestry Corps are billeted in this building, and are using the old hall as an impromptu dance hall. Entertainment and recreation of various kinds was an essential part of the life of the Forestry Corps, and contemporary reports speak of plays and musical shows being staged, recreation rooms being set up, and pianos and gramophones being provided. There are also many accounts of stodgy, boring, and inadequate food, thin blankets, cold and draughty accommodation, and hard plank beds, and the work was hard, the hours long, and the pay poor. So no doubt an impromptu performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, or just a gramophone and a little dancing, helped to take one's mind off these things. This picture also shows the distinctive clothing of the Forestry Corps, which followed the pattern of the Women's Land Army. In the centre, one of the women is wearing a white smock, while the others, including her dancing partner, are wearing the heavy pullovers typically worn for rough day-to-day work felling and sawing. They are all wearing breeches, a necessity for almost all the women who worked in agriculture, but, at least initially, controversial. Women in trousers challenged established ideas of propriety and were seen as defeminizing their wearers. The handbook of the Women's Land Army offered this advice to its breeches-wearing female workforce. The government has given you your sensible uniform and expects you to make sure that it is always treated with respect. It looks much better without jewelry or lace frills, for when you are at work, the smartest thing is to look workmanlike. You are doing a man's work, so you are dressed rather like a man, but remember that just because you wear a smock and breeches, you should take care to behave like a British girl who expects chivalry and respect from everyone she meets. The women who worked on the land were told that they could wear the rather masculine dress their work required while still being womanly. The women in Ursula Wood's picture are simply being themselves. There is one rather surprising participant in this dancing party. Why is the spectral figure of a Tudor lady joining the four timber girls in their revels? Hatfield Old Palace has a particular association with Queen Elizabeth I. Henry VIII used the Old Palace as a nursery for his children, and the young Princess Elizabeth grew up there. When her sister Mary came to the throne, she was kept under house arrest at Hatfield, and it was while sitting under an oak tree in the grounds of the palace that she was told, in 1558, that her sister was dead and that she was now queen. Her first council of state was held in this hall at the Old Palace. Given these strong associations, it is not surprising that Ursula Wood liked to imagine the young princess, tempted by the music and the sounds of women enjoying themselves in the ancient hall she knew so well, deciding to join them in ghostly form. It is also, perhaps, a sign of approval on the part of one strong woman from the past for these strong modern women who were serving their country's cause in their time as she did in hers. Thus the women of the Forestry Corps are incorporated into the pageant of patriotism and honoured with the approval of royalty and of history. Ursula Wood's service with the Forestry Corps ended in 1919, and she returned to her artistic career. It is unclear when she died, but it was probably sometime in the later 1920s. Both Ursula Wood and the Women's Forestry Corps deserve to be better remembered than they are.